Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Bitter Pill. I'm your host, Jeff Melton. And today I'm going to talk about uh, a common problem that I find in discussions in social media. And, I think, or I know, I'm a psychologist, so I know it's a problem that humans have in general where they know a lot about some particular thing. They're an expert in it or whatever, and they think they know a lot more than they do about other things, and confidently share their opinions on those other things. And when challenged, they get real defensive and so forth. So, uh, so that's what I want to talk about today, because I think it's important for those of us on the left, or those of us who uh, seek to change the world for the better, however you want to describe it, to have some humility and uh, kind of keep our urges to express opinions about things we don't know much about in check until we find out more about them. So, not that I want to pick on him or anything, but what prompted me to do this sort of episode now, because I've been thinking about doing it for quite a while, is this tweet or post or whatever you want to call it by Eric Feigl Ding, who's uh, an epidemiologist who's done a lot of good coverage of the COVID issue during the pandemic. But when it comes to politics, Eric is not nearly so well informed as the issues related to what he did his doctoral degree in. So, oops, wrong one. So here he says, well, this is a disturbing as hell statistic. More than half of MAGA Republicans believe Putin is a better president than Joe Biden, all thanks to Kremlin paid influence campaign to GOP voters here. So he shares some articles of MAGA Republicans. 52% of MAGA Republicans believe Vladimir Putin is a better president than Joe Biden. Russian trolls target U.S. support for Ukraine, Kremlin documents show. Okay, now let's think about this for a second. Most of you who watch this show regularly, or just in general follow politics closely and have been doing so for the last several years, know that since roughly 2015, there's been a concerted propaganda campaign to link Donald Trump with Russia, and to suggest that Russians are um, interfering in a major way in U.S. politics. And actually, this has a long history back in the era when it was the Soviet Union rather than just Russia that was a country. During the McCarthy era, civil rights activists, anti-war activists, and so forth were smeared as being pro-Russian or pro-Soviet Union, and as being dupes of the Soviet Union, and that's why they supported. That's why Black people supported the civil rights struggle, was because they were brainwashed by the communists, right? Because they didn't have those rights and were fighting for them. That's how deranged this sort of McCarthyist mentality that Eric is displaying here can be. And again, I don't mean to pick on Eric, because I think he has some good takes on things that he knows a lot about, and even some good takes on some political issues. He's certainly, very pro-Palestinian rights and against what Israel is doing, among other things. But he's really kind of swallowed wherever he got it from. I'm not sure. He denies that he's an avid reader of the New York Times, but wherever he got it from, he's swallowed a lot of uh, you know Cold War propaganda about Russia whole and regurgitates it on a regular basis. Um, so why might 52% of MAGA Republicans believe that Putin is a better president than Joe Biden? Well, for one thing, because Joe Biden is, a particularly bad president. Um, you know, he's a historically unpopular president for all sorts of reasons. Tens of millions of Americans are struggling economically, even more so than they did before Biden became president, with a massive inflation that occurred in 2022 and 2023, and the colossal rise in rents and healthcare costs over a much longer period of time than that. And those who are informed about uh, U.S. foreign policy, which isn't very many people until recently, but those who are know that Joe Biden is, the head of the U.S. empire, which has caused enormous amounts of death and destruction throughout the world for a very long time. Um, but certainly a lot of Republicans. I'm not sure what Uh, I'm not sure what this survey did to distinguish so-called MAGA Republicans from just Republicans, but uh, for Republicans in particular, you could certainly uh, be safe in assuming that a lot of the reason why they, um, oh God, I'm not sure why my computer is being so slow here. I got the spinning rainbow ball for some reason. Hopefully that doesn't mean my stream is going to crash. Um, but right now I can't seem to go to the tab that I'm using. So I'll give it a minute. Hold on. Closing a few apps here so that hopefully uh, things will. Oh, great. I don't know if you can hear me. It looks like my browser has crashed. So um, I will be back momentarily. God, this is unbelievable. Okay, I'm sorry for that. My browser just totally crashed on me. So uh, I don't know whether to start over or just try to pick up where I left off. But so anyway, just to briefly summarize where I was talking about how lots of people um, lack the humility to refrain from sharing their opinions about things that they really are not that informed about. And case in point, um, this gentleman, Eric Feigl Ding, who's a epidemiologist, has had a lot of thoughtful commentary on uh, pandemic-related issues, which his area of expertise is the spread of infectious diseases. So he knows something about that. But what he doesn't know a whole lot about, one example, is Russian politics. Um, so so again, he makes this claim that you know, a Kremlin-paid influence campaign has influenced Republican voters, such as MAGA Republicans, to believe that uh, Vladimir Putin is a better president than Joe Biden. Well, I mean, Joe Biden is a really, really, really bad president, even by American standards. He's more unpopular than any president in modern history, and there are a lot of good reasons for that. Um, the economy is in terrible shape, even though unemployment is pretty low. People can't afford stuff. Uh, he never met a war in his life that he didn't like. Um, and so of course, this was a continuation of policies under Donald Trump, but the U.S. really tried to goad Russia into getting involved in the conflict in Ukraine, and eventually succeeded. And um, as I've talked about on this show before, and as you're probably familiar with, if you follow my channel, or just if you're watching. Whatever you might think about the Russian invasion of Ukraine, launched in February of 2022, the notion that it was somehow, unprovoked, there was no rationale for it, is ridiculous. You know, the U.S. has interfered in Ukraine forever, since just after World War II, when the CIA and other components of the U.S. State interfered in Ukrainian politics by supporting literal Nazis, Ukrainian Nazis, who at the time, of course, Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, and basically, the U.S. supported the launching of a civil war there in Ukraine that took the lives of many Russian or other ethnic people in the Ukrainian region, and it took them several years to tamp down this far right-led revolt. And fast forward to several decades later, of course, in 2014, as you probably know, the United States backed a military coup in Ukraine that overthrew the elected government of Viktor Yanukovych and put into power this far right regime led by Poroshenko. And they had an election in 2019, which apparently was not rigged or anything, that brought Vladimir Zelensky to power. But for whatever reason, he continued the politics of his predecessor, being very anti-Russian, of even though he's ethnically Russian himself, engaging in ethnic cleansing of the Russian pop and attacks on Russian culture, ethnic cleansing, civil war with the eastern part of Ukraine, the Donbass region, which is heavily ethnic Russian, because ethnic Russians in particular didn't like this new, very anti-Russian government that came to power in the U.S.-backed coup in 2014. So there was a civil war. Several thousand Ukrainian civilians were killed, and you know Russia and among other countries made efforts to try and negotiate a peaceful settlement of that conflict, such as the Minsk and Minsk II agreements. But Ukraine, including under Zelensky, wouldn't adhere to those agreements or agree to any other peace proposals. Threatened to uh, attack Crimea, which is overwhelmingly ethnic Russian, and the people who lived there had actually wanted to separate from Ukraine and become part of Russia ever since the Soviet Union dissolved and Ukraine became its own state back in the early 90s. And this sentiment was amplified in the aftermath of the 2014 coup. So Crimea held a referendum and voted overwhelmingly to secede from Ukraine and join Russia formally. So Crimea was part of Russia starting in 2014. And Zelensky and other Ukrainian government officials, military folks, and so forth kept threatening to invade Crimea. As I said, they kept shelling the Donbass region, and there were battles between militias defending the Donbass and Ukrainian troops attacking it. And just prior to the Russian invasion of Ukraine on February 24th, 2022, there was intelligence that suggested that Ukraine was on the verge of launching an invasion of that eastern Ukrainian region, which by that time had also expressed a wish for independence from Ukraine. That took place first back in 2014. And so, oops, sorry about that. So the Russian invasion happened because of all that. Now Eric doesn't know any of this, or understand that there are legitimate reasons why Russians think that Putin is a lot better president than Americans think Joe Biden is. Putin, in opinion polls, has consistently received approval ratings between like 70 and 90%. So roughly twice what Joe Biden's are. And there's a lot you can criticize about Putin. If I were Russian, I don't think I would have voted for him in Russia's presidential election. But objectively, he's been a better president of Russia than Biden has of the United States. So as I said to Eric, for one thing, I said the only reason it isn't 52% or more of Democrats who express more approval of Putin or less disapproval of Putin than they do of Joe Biden is a decade-long American campaign to demonize Putin, whom over 80% of Russians just voted to elect, and Russia. And furthermore, I said, which one is supporting Israel's genocide and which one is opposing it? Obviously, we know that Joe Biden and the U.S. government generally is 100% behind the genocide that Israel is committing in Palestine. And conversely, Vladimir Putin has been very critical of what's going on in Palestine. So let's see, I had bookmarked some examples here. Let's see if I can find them. So Putin said, for instance, when you look at the children covered in blood and deceased children, then you look at how the elderly, how the women are suffering, how medical professionals are dying, it makes you clench your fist and cry. He also said, the extermination of the civilian population in Gaza, it's not shocking. Doctors have to do surgeries on children without anesthesia. It's not shocking. Actually, let me play that clip.
Понимаю, что это война,
I
гибель
understand that
людей
this
не
is
может не
war. The death of
потрясать.
people is shocking.
А кровавый
But the bloody
переворот на
coup in
Украине в
Ukraine in
2014 году,
2014,
за которым
followed
последовала
by a
война
war
киевского
of the
режима
Kiev
против
regime
своего
against
народа
its
на
own people in
Донбассе,
Donbass,
это не
it's not
потрясает?
shocking.
А
The extermination of the
истребление
civilian
гражданского
population in
населения
Gaza,
в Палестине, в
in
секторе
Palestine, in the
Газа
Gaza Strip
сегодня
today is
не
not
потрясает?
shocking.
А то, что врачам
That
приходится
doctors have to
делать
do
детям
surgeries on
операции,
children,
полостные операции,
abdominal
действовать
surgery with a
скальпелем
scalpel
по
on a child's
детскому
body
телу
without
без
anesthesia,
наркоза. Это не
it's not
потрясает.
shocking.
А то, что генеральный секретарь
That the
Организации
Secretary of
Объединенных
General of the
Наций
United Nations
сказал, что
said that
Газа
Gaza turned into a
превратилась в
huge
огромное
children's
детское
graveyard,
кладбище. Это не
this is not
потрясает?
shocking. Okay, so there we have the words of Vladimir Putin about the situation in Palestine. He's one of the overwhelming majority of world leaders who have been very critical of Israel's conduct in Palestine. I don't know that he's used the term genocide to describe what's going on, but certainly the Russian government has approved of every ceasefire resolution that's been put forward in the UN and various resolutions condemning Israel's conduct. They, in fact, put forward one of the ceasefire resolutions. The U.S., on the other hand, has vetoed all but one of them and abstained from the other one. And of course, we all know how central to what Israel's doing the U.S. has been. Israel couldn't be doing what it's doing without the full-throated support of the U.S. government, militarily, diplomatically, and economically. So, I mean, how does Eric not know this? I don't know. But let me call up another thing that he said. It's actually pretty similar to what Cornell West said. And Cornell West is another person who, although he's well informed about foreign policy in some respects, is particularly ignorant about Russia. So Dr. Ding said of Navalny, who is if you don't know, he was a Russian political prisoner, but he was in prison mainly because he was found guilty of fraud, and he was a Russian dissident who had far right sympathies and had very little popular support in Russia, and was more an advocate of discrimination against ethnic minorities and immigrants than he was an advocate of any sort of civil liberties. And in fact, was backed by the CIA and the National Endowment for Democracy. So far from being a hero, as Eric claims here, and as Cornell West has also claimed, Navalny basically was a traitor to his country, trying to undermine the Russian government with the backing of the U.S., just like Ukraine has been used by the U.S. for at least the past 10 years as a tool to try to undermine Russia. So I mean, stick to science, Eric, or at least talk about aspects of political issues that you're well informed about. But I don't want to let people who largely agree with those of us on the left on politics, or almost entirely agree with many of us, off the hook, because they too have been guilty of expressing opinions on topics that they are poorly informed about. So let's take the example of Max Blumenthal. There's one in particular I wanted to show you that I had in the thumbnail, but now I can't find it. In late December of 2021, Max Blumenthal said, and Max, as I'm sure you're aware, is the founder of the Gray Zone media outlet, who's done tremendous coverage of, among other political topics, the situation in Palestine, the genocide in Gaza, as well as much that's happened in that region of the world for many years, and done great coverage on the Ukraine war and many other international hotspots, Latin America, Syria, etc. But when it comes to scientific topics, he's not well informed. He's not an expert on most such issues, and yet he feels entitled to very confidently assert his opinion about them. So, for example, here he says, Julian Assange is responsible for as many American deaths as Omicron, 0. Now, at the time that he was writing this, there weren't very many deaths documented in the U.S. from the Omicron variant of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, because it had only just recently come to the U.S. And of course, it takes several weeks for people to die from COVID in most cases if they get seriously ill. But fast forward just a very few weeks, and you find thousands and thousands of people dying from COVID, and specifically mostly from the Omicron variant, as it overtook the infections from the previous Delta variant of COVID. So we were at one point having a couple thousand or more deaths every day, in January and February of 2022. And Max was basically continuing to minimize the impact of COVID on people for quite some time. Basically, he continued it, to this day. So just a couple of months later, he says, the lockdown left that spent last week spouting academic theory to undercut support for a trucker strike looks on with silent satisfaction as the imperial Trudeau regime imposes the Emergencies Act with power to freeze bank accounts. Okay, so regardless of what one might think about the pretty draconian crackdown on the occupation of the border area between the crossing between the U.S. and Canada in the Detroit and Windsor region, or the occupation of Ottawa that took place for several weeks, that was in protest of vaccine and mask mandates and against vaccines for COVID generally. Took place in Canada in early 2022. Regardless of what you think of the government's reaction to all that, and there are a number of things that Max overlooks here, because he's poorly informed about issues related to this. For one thing, there's reams and reams of scientific studies that Max ignores that the so-called lockdowns, to varying degrees depending on their nature, saved a lot of lives in a lot of countries, including countries like the U.S. that had very leaky lockdowns, where COVID certainly killed a lot of people. But then you look at countries like China that had much stricter lockdowns. Again, say what you want about whether you agree with that strict approach or not. They did indubitably save a lot of lives. There were very, very few deaths from COVID in China for the first couple of years of the pandemic. And they didn't even impose lockdowns on most of the country. As for his claim that it was a trucker strike, well, people who have reported on this found that his former colleague Ben Norton, for example, looked into this and found that it was mostly owners of trucking companies, as well as, of course, just the general crowd of people who were against vaccine and mask mandates, who backed this so-called trucker strike or truckers convoy or what have you, and that many in the leadership of the truckers convoy, both in Canada and the U.S. and in other countries where these sorts of protests took place, were, literally members of the far right, essentially neo-Nazis who, far from being strikers, were in fact, in Canada, the organizers were involved in an organization that broke strikes. Max just doesn't know what he's talking about in a lot of respects on these sorts of issues. Also related to the Omicron variant of the COVID, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, the virus that causes COVID, Max said in an interview with the Primo Radical channel, Omicron is doing what the vaccine is supposed to do. He claims it's mild and spreads faster, so catching it only gives you a cold while leaving you with natural immunity, which is better than vaccines. So, I don't want to go into detail about that, but basically, as we already discussed, it wasn't nearly as mild as it was claimed to be. It was just much more infectious than the previous variant, and because it was so much more infectious, many more people, not proportionally, but numerically, many more people were getting ill to a significant degree than was the case with earlier variants. So, in fact, it killed about as many people as, for instance, the Delta variant, far from just giving cold colds. And, in addition, the vaunted natural immunity, it doesn't last in terms of preventing you from getting reinfected any more so than the vaccines do. And vaccines in general are not designed, or they can't really protect you from getting infected to a huge extent because it's not like they put a barrier around your body that prevents the virus from coming in. They just slow down the replication of the virus and might make you not get sick at all or get less sick than you would otherwise. So you're a lot less likely to die, for instance. But vaccines don't work miracles. Now, Eric Feigl-Ding could tell you all about that because he's studied that issue a great deal, and in general, is very familiar with the science of infectious diseases. Max is not. On the flip side, Max is very familiar with, for instance, what's going on in Ukraine or Russia or Palestine, etc. He's studied those issues very closely. He's visited a lot of those places. Lived in Gaza for several months, for instance. The Gray Zone has had a lot of investigative reporters traveling throughout Ukraine. Has interviewed people who live there extensively, and so forth. So on those things, he knows what he's talking about. Eric Feigl-Ding does not. So in short, my plea to everyone is, please, if you don't know a lot about a particular issue, shut up until you do. Look into it. Listen to people who know more than you do about something. So, there are any number of people with expertise on Russia, for instance, that Eric could have gleaned information from. For instance, Stephen Cohen, the late scholar and husband of the editor of The Nation magazine, was perhaps the foremost Russia expert in the United States. And he predicted all this was going to happen in terms of ultimately war breaking out in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia, because of the U.S. Kind of behind the scenes instigating conflict, and in general trying to undermine the Russian state. He studied that very closely, so his opinion is worth paying attention to on that issue, whereas that of someone like Eric Feigl-Ding is not. So again, I don't mean to pick on anybody here, not on Max, not on Eric, or anybody else, but just a general thing that should be apparent to anybody who takes a look at it, that there's this tendency for people, for human beings in general, to confidently pontificate about issues that they don't know much about, and I get very defensive if their ideas are challenged. They'll engage in ad hominem attacks on you without engaging with your point substantively if you challenge them. So, for instance, Max Blumenthal attacks people who are pro-vaccine or pro-mask or pro-lockdown back when that was an appropriate response to the COVID pandemic, as branch COVIDians or the lockdown left, or various insulting terms, and just avoids discussion of the substance. Of course, we all know that that's the same thing that supporters of Israel, for instance, who don't really, they're very invested in a point of view, but they don't really know much of anything about what's going on. And so, anytime their opinions are challenged, the first thing they do is attack you personally. Just in general, a sure sign that somebody doesn't know what they're talking about is when they resort to personal attacks whenever you challenge their point of view in a substantive way with evidence and rational arguments. Um, so, there's a couple of names for this sort of phenomenon that we social psychologists have. One is called a Dunning-Kruger effect or syndrome. So the Dunning-Kruger effect is a cognitive bias in which people with limited competence in a particular domain overestimate their abilities, and of course are very resistant to having their overconfident opinions challenged. In popular culture, the Dunning-Kruger effect is often misunderstood as a claim about general overconfidence of people with low intelligence, instead of specific overconfidence of people unskilled at a particular task. So anybody, no matter how smart they are, can be susceptible to this sort of bias where you're overconfident, perhaps because you know a lot about something else. In part, you're overconfident in your opinion, the validity of your opinions about something you don't know very much about. And you likewise, we can look at this phenomena of people who don't know much about something being overconfident in their opinions and really digging in their heels when their opinions are challenged in terms of cognitive dissonance. The term that Leon Festinger gave to a phenomenon where people become uncomfortable when their beliefs and actions are inconsistent and contradictory, or their beliefs are contradictory with each other. And one way that can come about, certainly, is when people are confronted with evidence that they're wrong. So, particularly if it's well presented or well documented evidence, and the person being confronted in turn, doesn't really have a leg to stand on in terms of having evidence of their own to back up their own point of view, or doesn't have good quality evidence. A natural reaction is to, as a kind of ego protective mechanism, to dig in your heels and be very resistant to changing your opinion. In fact, kind of double down on your opinion. And we all know about that. Those of us who argue with people on social media, we know that it's very, very tough to change people's opinions because cognitive dissonance and other cognitive or emotional biases get in the way of people rationally reconsidering their opinions in light of new evidence. And social psychologist Elliot Aronson talked about, expresses a view that more evil has been done in the world as a result of cognitive dissonance or, similar phenomena such as Dunning-Kruger bias than pretty much any other reason. And, I think he's right. And I think those of us who are fighting for a better world would be well advised to set aside our ego, and when we're confronted with information that suggests that we might be wrong about something, instead of just immediately knee-jerk reacting, no, you're wrong, and furthermore, you're an idiot, or something like that, thinking, well, at least I should look into this and see whether maybe possibly I'm wrong. And so then you do look into the issue further, and maybe or maybe not, depending on what information you find, you reconsider and change your opinion. Anyway, that's kind of my recipe, in part, for building a better, more powerful left, is people approaching the world with much more humility than they generally do. And if you look at great leaders of social movements, like Martin Luther King, or even just people who are not necessarily movement leaders, but have strong political views that are backed by evidence, like say, Albert Einstein, that was one of their signature traits, is that they had a lot of humility and were willing to reconsider their point of view if there was reason to believe that they were possibly wrong about something. Okay, well, that's all I have to say for today. And please like and share and subscribe to this video. I mean, to subscribe to my YouTube channel, to like and share the video, and give me a like on Twitter or X, etc., so more people will be able to see the things that I present if you consider them worthwhile. All right, I will see you next time. Good day, everyone.